All right, Paul Fahrenheidt. Welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Mr. Burden. Thank you for having me back on. This is very
Yeah.
much a Virginia supremacy stream at the moment.
Oh, definitely. Every stream is just to one degree or another.
Yes.
This might be a little bit of deep lore because a lot of people probably haven't gone back through my back catalog. But you were actually episode 0 of the show, so it's good to have you back.
Yeah, I was. That seems like it was forever ago, even though it was only probably like 2 months ago, 3 months
Yeah, it
ago.
was it was April 13th. I actually hadn't even thought about it till I checked our DMs and I scrolled back up. So it feels like forever ago, but you're right, it hasn't been that long really.
Jeez. Oh man. So much has happened in between now and then. Like Lenin, I know, there's some of us who like to quote Lenin on this side of things because most dissident writers are just secretly Marxist Leninists and they just haven't come to terms with it yet. Um, but Lenin has this one quote that I really like, that goes something like, there are weeks, or no, not weeks. No, what the fuck? No, there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happened. Um, and this is very much true, honestly. Um,
No,
and
I think I think you have a point there, right? Like it does kind of seem like to a certain degree on the news front, like the current events, it kind of feels like everything's been kind of trapped in amber, right? Like we're kind of vacillating between, Russian news and, throwing our hands in the air up at Joe Biden, which has kind of been a holding pattern since February. But it does seem like, at least in our spheres, that things just keep detonating every 2 to 3 weeks. And I don't know. I think that it's, at least personally, I can find it personally tiresome, but I also just don't really get involved with it. Past a little bit of like there are some people that are just so ridiculous I can't help but comment at it. But at least me, I do get a little bit not like personally burnt out, but just frustrated. It feels pointless.
Yeah, I mean, everything. I will tell you this though, like it might just be because I stepped into the ring full time as, or not full time, but like, as full of time as I can as a content creator. But like ever since the Nashville event in February, it seems like the past couple of months have been like 30 years. Like it feels like I've been doing this forever. Um, so I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just been a consequential series of months, at least compared to what we used to have. But Lord knows, Lord knows. But no, it's great to be back on. It's great to be talking to you again.
Yeah, definitely. So there are a couple of things I want to talk with you about. Obviously, there's been some drama with you, which
Uh,
I'm only tangentially interested in talking about. It's again nothing against you. It's just drama is not my cup of tea, right?
I don't much care for it either, my man.
But it has sought you out one way or another. So one of the things that I want you to explore, and also let's be honest, this is something we have to kind of tread lightly around, given the censorship regime. But do you think that there's something inherently Africanized about American culture? Because that is kind of the core claim at the center of the Paul Fahrenheit drama.
No, no. I mean, this is a difficult thing to address. But asking if American culture like is negrified is like asking if American culture is deerified. Like it's asking like have deer had a major impact on American culture? Have Negroes had a major impact on American culture? I think you can say that. It's not like it's not even a question. Like you're not even taking it seriously if that's the claim you're making from the beginning. Like and to be honest, like I don't even know why it's steered in that direction. It's probably steered in that direction because that's the only critique that people who are critical of America and the American project can take against it. It's like, oh, your whole nation is nothing but Negroes and all this other stuff. It's I just don't understand it.
Well, it's especially odd to me because I feel like if you could ask me, like, well, what is my personal core, I guess, like complaint about America, right? Well, you could, at least from my perspective, there's a pretty fair complaint to say like, oh, well, it's a country kind of ruled by like an ideology of quantity, right? Like number go up, and America is kind of the cutting edge of, number go up economics, number go up social science. Like, that's a fair complaint to me. But the Africanized part of it is a little bit bizarre. And look, I get it that America is kind of the center of the media world, and a lot of media is kind of degenerate, right? But to me, that doesn't seem to be particularly. It comes from America, but I don't necessarily see it as originating from America.
This is another freaking this is another thing that it's difficult for people, and I'm sorry, I'm still trying to get warmed up here. I'm still trying to get the old brain whirring again. It's been a long couple of hours, but I think this comes from the fact that people just mostly attribute to the United States certain bad elements and bad actors within it, and they just don't take it seriously, and it's generally in bad faith from the outset. Like, when people talk about Hollywood and people talk about, the euphemism for certain ethnic group media complex, there's an ulterior motive with making that claim just from the get-go. And honestly, I just think it's number one, it's not actually addressing real issues that face us. And number two is it's trying to dig up and fight 150-year-old battles. I just don't think it's worth wasting time, energy, or effort even considering, right? Because anyone who takes a semi-serious study of American culture, of American history, of American music, of American art forms, of all this other stuff, will just realize that all of it came from the founding stock of this country, and it was adopted by that particular group in question, and then deracinated, right? But really, all of these critiques are surface level.
Well, and actually, here's the thing. I don't really begrudge, and this is part of the reason I don't really get involved in this conversation, is I actually think that anti-Americanism coming from the Euros is probably a good thing for them. I think that it's important that they kind of reestablish their own identity. And so personally, like, I don't really care, in the sense that, like, what they say about my country doesn't really bother me, because I don't really like to be not to be brutally honest about it. Obviously, like, I want the people who live in a country with 5 million, 6 million people to have, their own wonderful culture, but their opinions of how I live has almost no bearing on it whatsoever. And so it's like, well, obviously, like, I think that they're probably right in the sense that their culture has been largely, like, dictated to them by the Nuremberg regime. Fair enough, right? Like, I see that complaint. And so obviously I think that in the process of kind of reestablishing their own identity, they're going to push against my, in quotes, culture. But it to me, that seems like healthy. And I also don't particularly care what they think.
Yeah, it's really, like, the best way I can say it is, it's like, look, like, it doesn't take a genius to look at what we have now, to look at what's called pop culture, misleadingly, to look at, what normies consume. It doesn't take a genius to look at that and say, oh, this is terrible, this is degraded, this is a signature of decline, it's all this other stuff, right? But really, all that sorry, man. I mean, it's just like, it's like I don't really have much to say about this, because it's like I don't care about any of this. Like I'm pissed off that I have to talk about this shit in the first place. That, like, this is a degrading topic. This is degrading the freaking discourse. This is a symptom of an unserious movement of unserious people. Of people who don't care about what they do, who don't care about the consequences of their thought. They just want the clicks. They just want the attention. They just want all of this other stuff that has nothing to do with what they are pushing towards, right? Forgive me. I didn't mean to break out in that, but I like to think of myself, Jack, as a serious individual. I have met you in real life, right? I have met several individuals. I've met Charlemagne. I've met Turnipseed. I have met all of the who's who on the American side of these things, not because, for self-glorification or any of this other stuff. I don't really care about any of that. It's because I like to think of myself as a somewhat serious individual who is somewhat looking towards achieving real political objectives. And sitting here and doing a live stream or doing a week-long posting about, America's negrified culture or all this other stuff that like is just obfuscating and purposely in bad faith and purposely towards these negative degrading of conversations. Because guess what? When we spend all of our time talking about, oh, Lizzo is fat and this is the center of American consciousness. Oh, this is it really doesn't do. Number one, it's not a reflection of reality. And number two, it just doesn't help anyone. It doesn't. And I'm trying really hard, Jack, to not, because I know we're on YouTube. I'm trying really hard not to just say a bunch of shit that'll get us
well, thank you for that. Well, to me, there's two levels of it, which is one, do we accept the basic framing of it, and I'll first clarify, like I haven't actually watched your stream with AA all the way through. I found it a little bit frustrating.
I thought it was a very good discussion and I very enjoyed talking with him.
Well, fair enough. I'm glad you at least got something out of it. And so this is me more kind of reacting to kind of like what's been in the water than anything he specifically said, right? Like obviously, like I spoke with him, I had a good time. I have nothing but respect for the man. So it's nothing obviously personal at all. It's just it's been the discourse for the past 2 weeks, right? To me, it's odd too, because there's, to a certain extent, it's like, well, okay, like has this always been the case? That there's this kind of like this like black mark, so to speak, on American culture. It's like yes or no. If it's new, okay, fair enough. It seems to me that everyone's kind of had this, even if it's not necessarily African, right? Like everyone has experienced a degradation, not just America. Or is it kind of inherent to America from day one? And to me, it's like, well, if it's the second one, that isn't particularly unique to America, right? Everyone's culture sucks now, and it sucks significantly more than it used to. But on the other hand, like if it's from day one, I just don't see that. Like I look at Lizzo and I think like, well, that's highly degenerate, right? I look at kind of like post 1964 pop culture, and just pop culture in general, and I'm like, well, I don't like that. That doesn't reflect my values.
I know you have a monologue there. I just wanted to seize on something you brought up there, right? This quote unquote degradation you're all talking about doesn't begin until the 1960s, where it started happening across the entire Western world. All right. This isn't unique to America. America had a population of these individuals that made up a minority in a very geographically limited area, right? This group of people has been geographically limited for 90% of its history within America, right? Specifically to the Mississippi Delta, the Black Belt, and the low country of South Carolina and North Carolina, all right? The Tidewater, if you will. This is where the majority of these people have been for the entirety of American history and existence. And it's not like culture is this just goo that emanates from these evil islands and seeps into the foundations of this nation and negrifies it from within, and until one day you wake up. No, that's just a bunch of stupid propaganda, right? And this is stuff you see this in propaganda from World War I and World War II. They try to capitalize on it. They try to make this is a long-standing meme that is just completely untrue. And to be quite frank with you, right, if all of you say, oh, America's culture has been da-da-da-da-da, I can say, well, guess what? English culture has been Indianified or Pacified. Swedish culture has been freaking Somalified. German culture has been Syriafied. French culture has been Algeriafied. All this other stuff, right? So none of you, I'm not saying this. I don't want to make enemies. I've been making too many enemies from this. Too many people have been pointing to me as the bad guy, as the enemy for saying what I believe to be God's honest truth. All right. And that's fine. I can make enemies. I don't want to, but I can. All right. But the thing is it's like, it's dishonest. It's dishonest. All of you are being dishonest, and all of you are being uncivil and ungentlemanly in your conduct with this. You're being unserious. Sorry, Jack. I let myself go off again.
No, not at all. Look, you're on an interview show. The people are here to see you. So one of the other things that I think is difficult to separate is how much of this is connected to being kind of the center of the empire. So you could be forgiven for thinking, 150 years ago, well, oh, the source of the pause is England. Whatever the version of it back then was, right? Merely because it was kind of the center of the empire. And as that crown kind of shifted hands, again, I'm not sure that the America of 150 years ago was the same source of the pause that, it's portrayed as now. It seems to be more just, kind of we're the big dog on the block, so to speak.
Yeah. Everyone, no, this is true. Like everyone hates everyone hates the big kid on the block. Everyone hates the world power. Everyone hates the king. Everyone hates the sovereign, right? Even Demestra says it. The executioner is the most hated figure of all ages, right? America is the executioner. America is the sovereign of the world right now, and a lot of people just can't come to terms with that in one way or another. I don't look, people ascribe to me a lot more American chauvinism and a lot more American supremacy than I really believe, right? Than I really take seriously. I would like to reiterate that my ideal for a future is a unified Western civilization as one geopolitical nation state from the Oder River to the San Francisco Bay, or even further out to the city of Perth in Australia. That is my ideal vision, right? Of a unified geopolitical Western nation. Right. That's what I want. Right. America, I just see as as the only means to that end. Right. America is the most powerful, is the most rich, wealthy, resource oriented, and the most politically active with the most serious individuals within it of all of the Western countries I have found. Right.
Sure.
Is this
Carry on.
No, that's just my point. Is it's look, I'm not here to sweep all the sins, quote unquote, of America under the rug or all this other stuff, right? But there is a spiritual war going on. There is a spiritual war going on, right? And one of the weapons that the enemy we're fighting in the spiritual war uses on us is to obfuscate who our friends and enemies really are, right? And that's what I see happening here. That's what I see happening here. Is there's just this obfuscation. There's this obfuscation. There's this smoke screen in place in which people are led to believe that one group of people is their true enemy or another group of people is their true enemy, because the best way to keep an enemy in line is divide et impera. And that's kind of one of my many false endings probably to this line of thought.
So I'm curious, how do you meld that vision you have of kind of an American-led, Western super state with kind of the irreconcilable differences you describe in your piece on the Second American Civil War?
Well, like all things, the processes of history is a dialectic in between two ideas coming from the same general source, coming into conflict, and eventually there is a winner decided of those two ideas, with the good points made by the other idea generally adopted as we move on. Hegel and Hegelian dialectics, even though it wasn't Hegel who first talked about it, I think it was Schelling who first talked about it, but Lord knows they're all German idealists. They're all the same person. I actually believe that vision of history has a lot of merit to it. And one of the issues we've run into for the past couple of decades really is just that the dialectics are broken. Like if history was going along the course it would have gone on, if Western civilization was to basically almost exactly repeat the patterns in the same ways of, say, Greco-Roman civilization, Douglas MacArthur, instead of getting fired, would have simply mobilized the army and taken the reins of the United States government in the Korean War. Everyone calls him the American Caesar for that reason. That's what he was, and that's what he could have been. And he didn't. And so ever since kind of that moment, or at least one of those moments, American history has kind of been off kilter. And with American history, America being the center of the West following the end of World War II, when American history is off center, everything is off center. We live in an age of reversal, in an age of decline. It's really, someone once made the comment, I think it was actually from the Frankfurt School, so, the listeners can crucify me for this as well. Oh, he's quoting the Frankfurt School now. But no, someone in the Frankfurt School made this observation where they say, a symptom of decline is when everyone is talking about decline, right? And that says less about theories of historical decline than it does about the current state feeling like it's in decline, And, Spengler's increased in popularity. He was popular in his day because people in the 1920s felt that they were in decline. They just fought the single worst, most traumatic event in the entirety of European history. World War I is really what killed old Europe. That's, and so afterwards, like once you've killed that younger version of yourself, like you can only feel like you're in decline. And now when we're in the we had this small little victory over the Oriental hordes during the Cold War, right? Which was the Cold War really was a civilizational war between the West and between the Orient. And that goes against Yaki's opinion somewhat. To be honest, I know Yaki well enough, or at least I feel like I know Yaki well enough from his work, that I can disagree with him on a lot of points. I've gotten to the point where I can start disagreeing with him, and that's kind of how a lot of people in their studies of thinkers go. Once you know a thinker well enough, you can start to find their weak points and where they are incorrect in areas. But I still agree that there is a sort of extra European force that is extremely significant within Western countries. The thing is that an extra European force alone could never bring down Europe, right? There was a betrayal within the upper castes of Europe, particularly within I think royal families, merchant families, banking families. When I say merchants, I don't mean that in a euphemistic sense. I mean that in a professional sense. The moneyed interests of Europe joined with the old caste system from the medieval ages, the aristocracy, with all these other people, and joined with these extra European forces to ensure that their power never left their hands. And that's what's bringing Europe down. Nothing, this group of people that everyone likes to point at and say it's all their fault, they're the primary enemy. Okay, sure, right? Maybe it is their worldview that is our primary enemy, but a worldview can never enter the walls, right? Unless it breaks down the walls, which they prove they couldn't do, or have someone open the walls for them. And I think they Trojan horse their way in to Europe using the greed and the degeneracy and the power hungriness and the general corrupted nature of the European aristocracy, the European moneyed interests, and the American moneyed interests. Some of the worst perpetrators of the malaise, I apologize. Some of the worst perpetrators of the malaise upon Europe and America have been American moneyed interests. This is true. This is like the Russell family, the Astor family, the Van Duyn family, the Rockefeller family. These are all American families that came from Europe, but they are all American families who have perpetrated some of the greatest crimes against America and Europe. But that's not because they were doing it in service of either of them. They were doing it in service of their personal ambition, their personal greed, and they used their competency by being Western European people, which is the most competent people in the world. They used their competency to that end and not the end of Europe. And that's why they made an alliance, or a pact, if you will, with this group of people everyone likes to point to and blame for all the problems. And even so, this is still the case for today. People talk about the Queen's funeral. I don't much care. I see the royal family of England as accomplices to this, as a part of this. But they're just a minor one. I can only describe reality as I see it. I don't know. I'm not.
So I don't know. It's interesting you bring that up, because I have, like many people, kind of complicated feelings about Nietzsche. And slave morality is a great concept, but it's one of those concepts that almost everyone applies to whoever they don't like, right? It's just kind of like a catch-all. But that being said, I think we also need to recognize that, yes, okay, fair enough. There are kind of like exogenous influences on our society and our culture, very negative outside influences. But it's the exact same problem that like the James Lindsays, the rational centrists have. We're for them, right? Well, what's the kind of like the flaw at the root of American or of Western culture? Well, it's everything was going fine until the Soviets, until communism, right? Which, okay, fair enough. Like I'd imagine that Moscow is particularly interested in influencing the West in whatever way they could. Fair enough. But also that kind of like slave morality, where you're kind of every problem in your life is someone else did it to you. That kind of like resentment of like, oh, I'm being put down. I'm being put upon, that I have done nothing to cause this. Versus like what you said, where it's like, look, like we kind of have to own this, that like we, to a certain degree, not us, literally you and I, but like our people are at fault here. like we talk about the New Dealers, and to a certain degree,
Well,
like
what
you
do
look
you
at
mean?
people
What
like,
do you mean by our people, though? Like, be very specific when you're who you're holding at fault.
okay, fair enough. Again, you could say like, well, the elite, specifically in the European or the American context, right? Like the
The
elite of the old stock Americans, the founding
Yeah,
stock, like they,
the Boston Brahmins, the remnants of the Southern aristocracy that
right,
married
right.
into them and then became the WASPs in the early century. Yes, a lot of okay, fair enough. Okay, but this is why it's like when people say our people are at fault, that's very vague. You need to be specific. You need to name names. You need to name specific groups, because a lot of problems that arise in the I don't mean to interrupt you, Jack. I just want to make this point. A lot of
No, not at
problems
all.
that arise amongst us is that we are too general and we're too misty, and it's like this vague, unknowable, shadowy organization. No, these people are real. These people know who they are, and they tell us who they are, and we can tell who they are, and we can point at them, and they have names. In theory, they have addresses, and they need to be pointed at and held responsible, right? Like that's why I named several families. It's like that's the thing. Like they where the elite goes, the people underneath follow, and there are dissidents. There have been dissidents, especially in America, for a very long time, right? It's not as if this happened without a fight. America First was, quite frankly, Night of the Long Knives on December 7th, 1941, out of political relevance with the force of federal law, right? They just lost the political game. You can't blame them for not trying. They had a third, if not more, of the electorate. This is, and you can blame liberal democracy and all this other stuff, but like, that's another thing I have is it's like, well, one of the things that that guys on our side say is liberal democracy is a myth. Also, liberal democracy is the worst thing that ever happened. Well, hold on. Which one is it? Is liberal democracy a myth, which means we don't have it, or is it the worst thing ever, which means we do have it? It can't be both. Sorry, I just wanted to
No. I might mildly disagree with you, because I think that you can both say the description doesn't, like, what the label on the box doesn't match what's inside the box, and what's inside the box is poison.
Well, then it's a
both
myth.
of those can be true at the same time. But also, like, well, what do you call it? It has a label. Sorry, this may be a tortured analogy at this point, but I don't necessarily see those as being contradictory.
I understand your issue with that characterization. I understand how you will not see those as contradictory, but to those who are plugged in, they just know that whatever's going to be in the box is going to be poison either way, right? And the problem is that a lot of our guys who are supposedly should be plugged in are still saying stuff like, oh, the box is labeled that it contains this one thing, but it also contains this other thing, but I don't know. I'm kind of getting lost in the metaphor as well, but it's like,
Yeah. Sorry, maybe I should have used something a little more
no.
simple.
It's good. It's good. I wish I had the brain power to address it properly right now. But no, you're completely correct, my man. I mean, yeah. You can get to a point where you don't see them as mutually contradictory. The problem is it's like we're not there yet. The commentary on politics back in 2016, back in 2015, back on the Solo forum used to be far more complex, rational, and specifically pointed. The alt-right was the dissident right wasn't half the movement the alt-right was. The alt-right required a federally instigated operation to specifically get 8,000 men in one place at one time and put several backup layers. I'm speculating on all of this, but trust my speculations. That was for whoever is listening. But the federal government had several contingencies to ensure, hypothetically, that Charlottesville produced a dead body. And so it required that level of effort, that level of exercising power from the federal government to contain the alt-right. And that's because the alt-right was a rapidly increasing, serious political movement with several tangible points that were not convert America to Catholicism or convert America to Orthodoxy or bring back the ancient Votan pagan religion or make America an ethno-state or all this other stuff. The alt-right was serious. And that's why it had to be contained. The dissident right, the the whole reason I outlined all of this was basically to make the final point that the quality of discourse has degraded to such a point that I don't really see much utility with calling yourself dissident right anymore. I mean, a lot of the personnel, fantastic. I wouldn't engage with half of these people if I didn't think they were the highest IQ people amongst this generation. But
I feel like, to me, I agree with your complaint in the sense that you couldn't make a dissident right political party, right? I don't think that's the point. But also, like, what other catch-all do you use to describe like our general side? You know, the people who are essentially like, okay, because you could say the right, but then that lumps in like the Shapiroites and the Rush Limbaugh types, and that's not particularly useful. And so it's like you kind of need a mid-level of specificity in between right wing and like, my esoteric community of like online like weeaboo crypto fascists or something that specific.
But the problem with that is that like we're an online community of weird weeaboo crypto fascists. Like that's not a goal. That's not a goal. A good mutual friend of ours goes by the name of Christopher Sandbach, has made this excellent point recently that quite a bit of what we call online political spheres are fandoms. Everyone in the audience, I think, has a general idea of what a fandom is. Well, we are all in political fandoms, basically. We're all contained. We all have our little code words. Oh, I'm not an ortho bro, but that's a fan. The fact that they have names, that's a fandom. The ortho bros are a fandom. The trad cats are a fandom. The frickin' Anglosphere, that's a fandom. The AA sphere, that's a fandom, right? All of these people are basically organized in such a way that purposely puts them into conflict. And that's a way of engagement. And that has no effect on the outside world. That has no influence other than, among the minds of those who are already here or fallen here or all this other stuff. This is why I said on the AA stream that I'm a registered Democrat. I'm a registered Democrat. I don't vote. All right. I know a lot of people get mad at me and a lot of people call me subversive and a lot of people say all this other stuff. I don't vote Democrat. I'm a registered Democrat because it avoids problems in my professional life. That's why I'm that. But I'm also a registered Democrat because I feel like the Republican Party is useless, limp-wristed, and doesn't have anywhere more than 5 years to live. Maybe not 5 years. That might be a bit hasty of a prediction, but that's the point I'm making, is that the Republican Party is not long for this earth, right? And I see them honestly as more contemptible than the Democratic Party at this point, because the Republican Party falls over itself to market itself as the party of minorities, and it just fails at that. The Democratic Party doesn't even need to try to market itself as that. And I don't know. I'm not going to make this into a rank punditry politics thing, but it's like I call myself a liberal for that reason. I am a liberal in the sense of what liberalism originally meant. And I don't make any apologies. I don't call myself a classical liberal. I don't call myself any of this. I am a liberal. I am a liberal because liberalism is the ethnic ideology of my tribe. That is the consequences that thousands of years of steppe living brings you to. That life is essentially a long series of gambles made to be made with the hope of payoff one way or another. And that is essentially what liberalism is attempting to mitigate as much risk in those gambles as possible. And that's why I've decided to start going towards liberal. Now, I'm sure in the future there will be a better word that arises to describe us other than liberals, right? But like, as for right now, I cannot call myself a dissident, other than the fact that I don't like how the pop culture and how the racial policies of my nation and all this other stuff are run, right? I personally think that there is a lot contemptible within the current United States government. But the thing is that a lot of people mistake the means being, or the ends being bad, for the means being bad. A lot of people mistake the outcome for a fault in results, for a fault in techniques, right? At the end of the day, the only thing you can control is your intentions. You can never control the outcome for anything you do. My intention in political action, and I say this completely honestly, I say everything completely honestly. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But my intention in political action is to ensure that my people, number one, their existence is secured. I understand, that has connotations. But number one, I ensure that my people continue existing on the face of the earth. Number two, I want to ensure their prosperity and their continuation. After that, it's kind of up in the air as to whatever the issues of the day are. Advancement, exploration, expansion, charity, all of that can be decided after those couple of things are discerned. And that is why I cannot call myself a dissident anymore. That's, I don't know, that's kind of schizophrenic, but I hope you understood what I was trying to say with that.
Yeah, to me, I totally get the kind of like ideology of your people thing, right? Like, I think if we can broadly construe like our team as kind of particularists, right?
Yeah.
So people who want, like, I want, and this is what I said about not particularly begrudging the Euros their anti-Americanism, is like, well, okay, it's a little bit irritating when it's on Telegram, but also like I think it's broadly positive for them to have their own culture. And I think there's a certain amount of ribbing that kind of comes with that. You know, I think that's probably positive. But to me, I don't know if I understand that you can kind of go back specifically in the Anglo tradition and find kind of themes of liberality, right? So like Parliament is a pretty old institution in the grand scheme of things. But I do kind of, I don't know if I can be convinced that the liberal tradition is still workable in any way. And that doesn't mean that we have to or really can fully abandon it, because I think there is something to be said for the fact that like kind of no matter what, we're saddled with our heroes and with our kind of like political language. So when Thomas and I were talking about this, we're basically talking about how like, well, your religion essentially provides you the language you use to relate to authority. You know, and I think those are pretty limited, right? That much like your people have a state religion, so to speak. There's also kind of like a state or a set of state organizing principles. And I get that. But to me, I guess I don't know how much we can, and maybe this goes back to our conversation about liberal democracy. I just don't, to me, that doesn't seem workable anymore. I feel like we are kind of living in the manifest breakdown of that.
Of course. Like, no, you're completely correct. I call myself a liberal because it's the only thing I can find as a placeholder. That's the only thing I can find to sort of hold myself to something that means something that doesn't get me immediately, not even targeted. You know, it's not even, people talk about the federal government targeting them. That's not even that. Like, to get me taken seriously by general society, I have to call myself a liberal. And to guess what? Being taken seriously by general society is actually a good thing. This is what political movements are meant to do, is get taken seriously by general society. And so you can't come at general society, boomer truth or not, with like spinning wheels and swastikas or all of this other stuff that, you know, really, you know, yeah, it's cool. I like the spinning wheels as much as you do. I believe as much in ancient Aryan esotericism as everyone else does. But you don't emphasize that. That's not what you emphasize. You emphasize, as you said, Jack, you emphasize it in words, phrases, memed concepts that the government, not even so much the government, right? Because they're a lot less important, especially in America, than people think they are. As a matter of fact, all this bluster coming from the government is actually them trying to hide up the fact that their soft power has been completely destroyed and they can't even exercise their authority outside of a very small area around Washington, D.C.
Before you go on, can you actually explain that? I'm curious what you have to say on that.
Oh yeah, no, the federal government has been losing power for decades. And this has been proven by the recent double-barreled Supreme Court case, which decided the last two issues, the two most animating political issues of the past 30 years, being gun control and abortion. Those are the two most animating issues. Those are the only two issues really anyone was supposed to have an opinion on. Gun control and abortion. And both of those were solved just like that in one single Supreme Court session.
I guess I am, and maybe this is me being a little overly cynical. I'm not convinced those issues have really been solved.
No one's talking about them. No one's talking about them in any sense that means anything anymore.
I mean, for now, but I feel like we're still well within the window of wait till the next, 16-year-old needs an abortion for her, heavily mutated 8-armed baby.
Well, let me
next
tell
school
you,
gets shot up.
Let me tell you why I think you feel that way. And that's because the solution that the Supreme Court came up with was quite literally John C. Calhoun's nullification doctrine. For the first time since probably the admission of the state of Texas, the federal government has delegated power to the states instead of vice versa. Essentially, it was decided, not explicitly, but de facto, it was decided that blue states will ban guns and let babies be killed. Red states will let guns run free and not let babies be killed. That's what was decided, right? The places where it is where it will stay. The places where it isn't is where it won't stay. That's how the Supreme Court shows it. So what this tells me, right? Even if you don't necessarily agree with that framing and you want to contest it, accept it for the premises of this next argument. Just entertain it. If you take these two Supreme Court cases as an indicator that the federal government is losing power, is losing its ability to influence anywhere outside of its basically imperial strongholds, we're living in a time right now where very likely, if a state just de facto seceded from the United States, they didn't do it de jure on paper, but like basically changed all their trade routes, all their water lanes, all that. No one could really do anything about it. No one could really do anything about it and do anything to change that. And that's what's happening right now is the federal government is getting more and more and more brazenly powerful because it doesn't have the ability to subtly influence. The days of Waco and Ruby Ridge and all this other stuff are over. This is a point my mentor Thomas makes, is that the centralization of the federal government, just as it was in the 90s, just does not exist today. It does not exist because the competency to keep it centralized has just left. No one smart goes into government work. We all know this. All the people who work government jobs are midwits, mediocres, right? All the smart, high-speed people who come from elite backgrounds go into shit like high finance. As a matter of fact, that's kind of how America has almost always been, is that most of the power of America is really just concentrated within the private sector. And it's a hard thing for a lot of people to conceptualize, especially when we spend 4 years programming ourselves that the sovereign is he who decides the exception. Well, the sovereign of the United States is not found within de jure power. It's found within where the money is. And believe it or not, high finance is still very much controlled by WASPs. It's not, you have that other group trying to, take the top, but they're just not as good at it. Really, they aren't. They're just not as good at it. WASPs still control high finance. All the boys from Massachusetts and New Hampshire and Rhode Island that go to the Ivy League schools and all this other stuff, they go into high finance. And that's I honestly, like Jerome Powell, for example, chairman of the Federal Reserve. Jerome Powell is the most powerful man on earth. Even more so than the president, because Jerome Powell controls the most powerful economic force on earth, which is the Federal Reserve, which can essentially at will go against its own charter like it did in 2008 and just print money. Not even in terms of inflation or adjusting interest rates, just print money, just create. That's what, without changing the value of the dollar. A lot of people don't realize, I don't have, I'm going to stop myself before I jump into waters that, people could tear me apart for, but I have a notion. I have an idea that the United States, as it was meant to be set up, was a system where you could quite frankly create infinite wealth and it would work. I'm trying to figure out what education I need to go through to see if I can prove that theory correct or not. But what I would recommend the audience to look into is Alexander Hamilton's first and second letters on the public credit, I believe is what it's called. And Benjamin Franklin's, I need to remember the title of it, but the founders talked about this stuff. I have to scroll up to the person who sent me the article to read. But anyway, this is kind of the general notion I'm getting at, is that it's like I don't even know how I'm supposed to tie this into what I was saying. I'm sorry. I'm really schizophrenic right now, but I'm hoping like the little points I'm getting on are making sense, and correct me if they're not.
So I guess to me, and this is kind of an open question, And I realize that the more economically focused in our crowd are basically saying like, look, like the economy's in real rough shape right now. We're kind of finally getting the catch up from the .com, the housing crash, and then kind of like the COVID crash all at once.
Mhm.
And to me, there are kind of two trends pushing against each other that I think will be kind of important for the long term. And on one hand, there's the idea that like, look, like you kind of can't keep violating the rules, quote unquote, forever. Like gravity wins eventually. Fair enough. Okay, your airplane can take off, but eventually you have to touch down again, willingly or not. So that's on one side. And then there's another part of me that's like, well, can they pull this off? Can they essentially keep the money printer going forever? And to me, I'm not entirely convinced. To me, when I look at even the people at the top levels of finance, they don't seem to me as capable as their predecessors were. And maybe this is just like too much direct contact with the industry. That I know these people and I'm not particularly impressed by these people. And so maybe I'm just cynical. But I'll put it this way: we'll see. You might be right. I can see you being right, but I think that we'll kind of see the proof in the pudding over the next year or so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In addition, I wanted to address something Saddam Hussein was talking about, worth the money. My Substack is free for everyone. You can give me money only if you feel compelled to give me money, but I've ended all paid content. If you just want to support what I do, feel free to give me $5 a month, but that's like all my stuff is free. And yeah, you're correct. This is something I've really wanted to go down, because I in many ways I'm a basic bitch goddamn conservative at heart. And if in the sense that people talk about that the founders were these really, really intelligent people who had a great idea. And I think that that's true. It's just now I've added a whole bunch of race stuff and other stuff that was kind of edited out of the narrative. I really do think that the founders of the United States knew exactly what they were doing and set forth the plan exactly as it was supposed to be. It's just the second they set it forth, a couple of things happened that completely prevented the United States from being what it was supposed to be. Number one, preventing the foundation of a central bank. I am pro publicly owned central banks, because that's the one of the things that you need in order to have a sovereign country. Because if you don't have a publicly owned central bank, foreign owned central banks will own your country. That's just the way things work. But another thing that was done was basically Marbury versus Madison. For those of you who have done any pre-law work, Marbury versus Madison and its consequences have been a disaster for American jurisprudence.
Can you, just for anyone who isn't, could you do like a back of the napkin sketch of the case?
Oh yeah, well basically what happened was there was a guy called Marbury. Basically, the early American Republic in the early 1800s is characterized by what you would call the first party system. We're currently in the seventh party system. The first party system was the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. This is the thing that everyone knows. Thomas Jefferson versus John Adams or Alexander Hamilton. And John Adams was the second president of the United States, and he lost. He lost the election of, I believe, 1800. I could be incorrect, but I believe 1800. And so basically what happened was, because judge appointments are for life, including Supreme Court appointments are for life, what happened is that John Adams did what we call the midnight appointments, which is the last night. He was appointing everyone to every post he could to ensure Federalists remain in government, because that was at a point where an anti-Federalist victory, one side or the other, basically meant the political death of the other side. So John Adams was struggling, was rushing to appoint as many people as possible. And he appoints this gentleman by the name of, I forget his first name, but his last name was Marbury, to a judge position. I don't know if it was a Supreme Court justice. I think it was just a federal circuit court position. And the letter wasn't delivered to him on time. And so when Thomas Jefferson was inaugurated the next day, he just rescinded the letter. And so Marbury, having an issue with this, he's like, well, look, I was appointed. The only thing was just my letter wasn't delivered. And so he brought it to court. And John Marshall, the first Supreme Court justice, the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, basically took this minor dispute over a appointment to because this was the first ever Supreme Court case that they took. He basically took this minor dispute over a single political position within the government that was really minor, and then somehow managed to Jew his way into, I hope this doesn't get streamed, I'm sorry, somehow managed to scheme his way into deciding, into basically subverting the entire US Constitution. Basically it's absolutely insane what he was able to do. He completely out of nothing established this concept called judicial review, which is basically, because of this one case, I have decided as now precedent that the Supreme Court now gets to be the sovereign of the United States government. We get to decide what is constitutional and what isn't. And if it goes against the Constitution, then we can just throw it out the window. So this is why Thomas makes the point that the Supreme Court is the sovereign arm of the US government, because nothing can overturn a Supreme Court ruling other than another Supreme Court ruling.
So it's interesting. That's one of the things that I think could legitimately really shake things up over the next couple years is if the DOJ essentially makes an attempt at overturning a Supreme Court case in effect, right? You heard mutterings about that out of the Roe decision, and also out of the what was the gun decision? I can't remember that off the top of my head.
I know what you're talking about. Oh,
it's versus NYPSC.
Oh, are you talking about the one? Are you talking about the one that was recent?
Yeah, the two of those, right? There was rumblings that the DOJ was essentially going to make a move to essentially nullify those in effect. And to me, I don't know that will happen. I don't think that will happen. And I agree with your analysis. I agree with Thomas's analysis that the Supreme Court is the seat of sovereignty. But I do think we could see an attempt to unseat the sovereign, given at least like stated preference. And who knows, maybe that's just stated, right? That's just something to get the donors out. That's just something to shake your fist at. But to me, it's like, well, they've at least floated the idea, if you see my point.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty easy if you have someone who actually knows the problems with the US government being willing to exercise that de jure power that a position can give you. It's pretty easy to fix all of these problems actually very relatively quickly. The problem is that that's just not going to happen anytime soon. But the thing is with it is that look at the ethnic and religious persuasion of the majority of Supreme Court justices. That's all I can say. It's not a bunch of New England or Southern waspy Protestants that's on the Supreme Court. It's a bunch of Catholics and Madam Kagan.
No, I see your point, and I'm quite sympathetic to Thomas's kind of more ethnic reading of U.S. politics, right? I think that's a strong argument. I guess to me, it's just like I think that one of the big mistakes, and I'm not calling you a conspiracy theorist, that's not my point at all, but the big mistake of kind of like the conspiracy mindset, and I think we should avoid this, is the idea that like, oh, whoever they is, they're all in on it. It's always the same they. And to me, right, that doesn't seem to particularly match up with human nature, right? Because even when you are literally, explicitly, and contractually all motivated towards the same end, right? You're on a team, you're on a unit, you're at a job. People don't work like that, and there's kind of like constant like backbiting and infighting, especially when there's power to be had. And so my point is not, again, and maybe this is a digression, for another time, but to me, it's like, while I agree that the Supreme Court is the current seat of sovereignty, I'm not convinced that will be the case forever.
Oh no, that's exactly what I'm saying. Like it's very easy to overturn this if you have a sovereign. FDR could have done it. He almost did do it. The thing is just like he already exercised complete and total sovereignty that he didn't even need to change the de jure structuring of the Supreme Court. Like the Supreme Court just did what he told it to. But no, you're correct. Like you get a sovereign individual who's like not afraid to use power in there. Basically, yeah, this could all get fixed really quickly. But no, you're correct. But like on your criticism of the conspiracy, argument, it's just as much of a mistake to assume that there are no conspiracies whatsoever. Like I completely agree with your take when I say it's not this one group of people whose name I accidentally said a little while ago. It's not them, they're accomplices. That's a key word. They're accomplices, right? It's not them. It's not that they have had zero influence in this. As a matter of fact, they have been quite active in this, but they're not the final boss, so to speak.
Well, and they are not completely unified,
Well,
right?
yeah.
Like obviously, to me, it's this.
That goes without saying, though. Like,
yes, it does for you and I, but I don't think. I think that people do legitimately have this kind of like, and a lot of like the WF tards kind of go off on this, or the Q tards, right, where they literally believe that there's some kind of like secret, like one world government cabal, pulling the strings across the world. and to me, it's like, and maybe this isn't worth getting into. Right. Yeah. But it just is, it goes against human nature. Like people don't operate like that. And it's why, and maybe this is again, as we're kind of like coming out on time, to me, it's why I'm not entirely sure that kind of like what you described as kind of this like pan-European state, some like kind of like idealized end goal. I'm not quite sure that can work. It's not that I wouldn't like to give it a shot, like maybe it's a good attempt at it. But to me, I guess I'm unsure that kind of humans can maintain control over that level of complexity.
I disagree, because one of the particular points that the dissident right has emphasized way too much is the limitations of humans. And yes, humans do have limitations. However, history isn't a line. That's obviously, that's been disproven, but it's not a circle. History is a spiral. It is a series of down and ups, getting ever more and more and more complex each time. Only an idiot would look at an ancient civilization and say this is the exact same as modern civilization. And, yes, our ancestors did have strengths that we did not have, right? We have traded in certain strengths for other strengths, and we have certain weaknesses that our ancestors wouldn't even scoff at. But we also have certain strengths that our ancestors couldn't even know how to cope with. Like, it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to fully emphasize the strides we've made. And believe it or not, this is another thing. I actually believe in this idea called progress. I actually do think that's a thing, right? I think that is something that, is possible. It does take a lot of sacrifice. And yes, there is a cyclical nature to things, but I don't think that, we're just forever trapped in this stagnation, in this eternal return to the same. No, I can't accept that, because if I accept that, then basically there's no point to do anything politically, because the powers will always be the powers.
So I might disagree with you there, because I obviously believe in technical progress. Right? You'd have to be an idiot not to. I don't. Obviously, we can kind of make fun of like the Yakubians who believe that ancient Egyptians were had giant brains and were flying around in pyramid spaceships. That's retarded. But I guess I'm less convinced, and this might be kind of like a faith level presupposition, right? Like kind of like buried that deeply, that I do think that kind of there's no such thing as human progress. I think that humans are kind of a baseline value. And to me, I think that you can kind of shift your focus around, like fair enough. Like I can listen to music that would make, a caveman's brain explode. Like my capacity for, just sensory overload is way higher, whereas he could probably, run a little bit longer than I could, to put it mildly. So, but I think that there is just something, and maybe this is that the kind of like the Calvinist in me. I just don't know if I can be convinced that humans can be changed in that way.
Well, I'm a Calvinist too, and let me have this Calvinist counter argument to your Calvinist argument. I think it's God's will that we be changed. I think it's predestined that we be changed. It's predestined that we undergo an already set determination of a series of changing. Like I was recently at a meetup of a bunch of friends in Arkansas. Some of them are in the chat, I think. Are any of them in the chat? No. Surprising. But I was with I was with a bunch of friends recently in Arkansas. People, and Thomas was there, as was the Kid Ace, as was a lot of other people. It was a wonderful gathering of individuals. And my buddy, who goes by his real name, Jerry, he said that God created the Faustian man to colonize the stars. That was his purpose for creating us. And I cannot help but believe that. Like, everyone who's European or vaguely European in sentiment, who sits there and thinks for 5 minutes, well, what's our destiny we're being kept from? Space exploration and space colonization. That's the one thing we're destined to do. And we haven't done it yet. Therefore, we still have a mission to do. And that's what I think we were predestined to do.
Well, fair enough. And that's a hell of a note to end on. So Paul, do you have anything you wanna plug before we end this?
Yes, you can follow me on Twitter at CavKingPaul, unless you're a woman, and then I will block you. I block all women on my Twitter. It just like, with certain exceptions, of course. I never have a total rule, but for the most part, if you're a woman, I will block you because it just avoids problems. You can find me on Substack, paulfahrenheit.substack.com, and you can find me on Telegram at Hotel Fahrenheit, spelled the same way you see the name on the screen.
All right. And as far as my plugs go, obviously, if you're listening to this, you have my YouTube channel. The show is also available on Spotify, on Apple Podcast, anywhere you can get audio only versions of the show. My links are down in the description. If you want to follow me on Twitter or join the Telegram, you're more than welcome to. And if you do feel generous, donations are always appreciated. So far, I have received a magnificent grand total of $25, which I actually do appreciate, because I do have to pay for streaming services and stuff like that. But obviously, I just appreciate talking to you guys, and I do this because it's fun. And remember, guys, keep your head up. The light can't last forever. Good night, everyone.